The Well-Tempered Clavier by Bach. The Bible and Music. The Well-Tempered Clavier by Bach divided the history of music into before and after. What mysteries does this legendary cycle hide, and why can it be called the musical Bible? Musicologist Yulia Kazantseva will talk about this in a new essay for the FOMA Magazine Academy. Riddle number 1. Who was Bach in his time? 1722 in world history. The year when Dutch sailors discovered Easter Island. And for the first time in human history, Bach created music in all 24 keys. Let's see what was happening in the composer's life in 1722. He turned 37 years old. Many significant events had already occurred in his life. He had 7 children, 3 of whom he buried. His beloved, still so young wife Maria Barbara, had died. He held various positions, including organist roles in Arnstadt, Mulhausen, Weimar, and Cöthen. A year before creating the Well-Tempered Clavier, Bach, a young widower, met in Cöthen a talented 20-year-old singer, Anna Magdalena, whom he soon married and with whom he happily lived for the rest of his life. They had 13 children. By 1722, Bach had written a huge amount of music. The Toccata and Fugue in D minor, the Capriccio on the departure of a beloved brother, the famous peasant cantata, and, besides that, sonatas and partitas for solo violin with the famous chaconne, cello suites, the celebrated Brandenburg concertos, and, of course, numerous church cantatas, which we will still talk about today. Bach spent 6 years in Cöthen, where he wrote the Well-Tempered Clavier. They were unusual 6 years. The fact is that in Cöthen the composer wrote almost no church music. It was the only period in his life when he held a secular position. All the rest of the time Bach served as an organist and wrote sacred music. So what was this secular service? In 1717, Bach joined Prince Leopold of Anhalt-Cöthen as Kapellmeister, that is, musical director. Bach's duties included providing the prince's court with beautiful contemporary music, composing, rehearsing, and performing new works for the enjoyment of his patron. It must be said that Prince Leopold himself was a good musician. He valued Bach's talent, paid him well, and gave him great freedom. Only one but. Unlike the Lutheran Bach, the prince was a Calvinist. A follower of a very strict branch of Protestantism, he did not welcome the use of music in worship. That is why most of Bach's Cöthen works were secular, though only at first glance. And now we have come to the moment when Bach achieved the impossible, wrote music in all keys, and created the cycle the Well-Tempered Clavier. Riddle number 2. A Moment of Theory. The title of the composition was written in Bach's own hand on the autograph's title page. The Well-Tempered Clavier, or Preludes and Fugues in all tones and semitones for the use and practice of musical youth eager to learn, as well as for the particular pastime of those already skilled in this study. Composed and prepared by Johann Sebastian Bach, currently Kapellmeister and Director of Chamber Music to the Prince of Anhalt-Cöthen, in the year 1722. So what are these tones and semitones Bach writes about? We will need a brief moment of theory, so have a little patience to understand Bach's greatness. Imagine a piano keyboard in front of you. 7 whites, 5 blacks. 12 in total. The white keys are the familiar do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. The smallest distance between notes is called a semitone. For example, if you move up from do to the nearest black key, you go up a semitone. That black key will be called do sharp, meaning do raised by a semitone. And if from Re you step down to the nearest black key, stepping again by a semitone, that same black key will be called not Do sharp, but Re flat, meaning Re lowered. At first glance, it may seem a little complicated, but you quickly get used to this system. If you play from Do up the white keys, you get a very pleasant scale. We call it C major. And now pay attention. From any note you can play a scale in a specific pattern and also get a major scale. From Re, D major. From Sol, G major. But these scales will not be only on the white keys, they will also use black keys. Children are usually told this. Major is the color of joy, minor is the color of sorrow. No scholar has been able to explain why a certain order of sounds affects us this way. The scale from Do is perceived as joyful, while the scale from La is perceived as a sad minor scale. The perception of major and minor is one of the greatest unresolved mysteries. And here we come to the solemn moment. It turns out that on each note you can build a major or a minor. You get C major or C minor, G major or G minor. Build with black keys. We get F sharp major, F sharp minor, E flat major, or E flat minor. Now let's count. We have 7 white and 5 black keys. On each we can build major and minor. That means we can have 24 keys in total. 12 major and 12 minor. But before Bach, no one had used all 24 keys. About half the keys had been inhabited. Keys that required many black keys, sharps, and flats were disliked. So how did Bach come up with the idea? To be the first to write in never-used keys? First, because Bach was Bach. And second, at that time, they began experimenting with a new way of tuning keyboard instruments so cleverly that even difficult keys with many sharps and flats began to sound beautiful. It must be said that not only the difficulty of writing and playing deterred Bach's predecessors. There was also some sourness in the sound of the difficult keys. So the well-tempered clavier can simply be translated as the well-tuned clavier. Technical crash course done, briefly but done. Now let's talk about the most interesting thing. The meanings of this great work by Bach. Riddle number 3. Hidden plots. Before we finally move into higher spiritual realms, let's look one last time at the title page where Bach wrote the name. The Well-Tempered Clavier or Preludes and Fugues. The last thing to clarify is what Preludes and Fugues are. The Baroque era, the era in which Bach lived, loved to combine contrasts. Major next to minor, a fast tempo and then a very slow one, free improvisation and the most complex, mathematically precise composition. A prelude, as you understand, is a prelude, an improvisation, and a fugue is not the poisonous fish of Japanese cuisine, but a polyphonic composition written by a strict recipe. Bach was a great master of such polyphonic, that is, multi-voiced music. Therefore, in each of the 24 keys, Bach wrote one prelude and one fugue. These make mini-cycles within the big cycle. Now, with a clear conscience, we move to the spiritual sphere, namely the hidden meanings of the Well-Tempered Clavier. must say right away that these meanings are hidden only for the modern person. Any contemporary of Bach would instantly recognize that this prelude and fugue strongly resembles the music of Holy Week, while this one resembles the music of the Christmas service. The Lutheran service is not just musical. Martin Luther completely changes the approach to church music. He makes it as clear as possible for the simplest parishioner. He not only translates chorale texts from Latin to German but also rewrites the music. The melodies of the new Lutheran chorales are by nature simple and easy on the ear. Bach, as we have already said, served as an organist for almost his entire life. His duties included not only accompanying the service on the organ and playing along with the congregation when they sang chorales, but also composing music for the Sunday service. Bach was a deeply religious man, and of course he knew all the chorales of the church year by heart. One could say Bach was steeped in chorale motifs. And it is not surprising that echoes of these chorales can be heard in his secular music, especially in the Well-Tempered Clavier. The prominent Russian musicologist Boleslav Yavorsky, in the early 20th century, conducted a thorough study of the entire Bach cycle of preludes and fugues, and in virtually every one of them he found references either to chorale themes or to cantata themes. For example, in the theme of the C major fugue, there is a reference to the theme of the cantata, Love the Lord with All Your Heart, which speaks of the Annunciation, the gospel event when the Archangel Gabriel brought the Virgin Mary the news that she would bear the Savior. Thus, the C major fugue is not abstract music, but the music of the Annunciation. The famous C major prelude that precedes the fugue is perceived more on an associative level as a picture of the Annunciation. C major is a white, pure key. White, because it has no sharps or flats, like white lilies in paintings dedicated to the Annunciation. The even figurations of the prelude are like the shimmer of angel wings. In addition, the score of the prelude is written for 3 voices. This is a symbol of the Holy Trinity. The third, upper voice again consists of 3 notes. Bach, like many Baroque composers, liked to use numerical symbolism. In general, the preludes of the cycle are a more external, more cinematic depiction of events, while the fugue is the event itself, its essence. Thus, in the C major prelude we hear the rustle of angel wings, and in the fugue, the very good news. In the D minor prelude, Bach is believed to depict the calming of the storm on the Sea of Galilee, when Christ, crossing to the other shore with his disciples, fell asleep, a storm broke out, and the boat began to sink. Awakening, Jesus rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still," and the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Close your eyes, and you can see the raging waves. The musical pattern repeats the pictorial depiction of a wave during a storm. Bach himself had never been at sea and had never seen a storm. At the end of the prelude, there is a vivid moment when the storm suddenly truly stops, and the minor prelude ends in major. Ending a minor work with a major chord has its own special story. For Bach, this too carried deep meaning. Major is a symbol of the kingdom of heaven and eternal life, even after the darkest and most sorrowful minor. Now let us look at the radiant G major prelude, which depicts the universal running and rejoicing when the disciples learned of the resurrection of Jesus. The musical figurations seem to collide, everything is mixed together. Joyful exclamations and a rushing run. The G major fugue conveys the mood of rejoicing and also consists of jubilant, energetic shouts. Now let us look at the famous E-flat minor prelude. It is one of those keys that Bach used for the first time. A key which, after this prelude, would be associated with the deepest sorrow. This prelude is an image of mourning for the crucified Jesus and his removal from the cross. Note the rhythm of the steps. It is the rhythm of the saraband, a funeral dance. And how is the upper voice built here, on a sobbing intonation? If we look at how the melody is written, we will see constantly descending lines on the staff, like helplessly drooping gestures. In these T. Matthew Passion there is the aria, Golgotha, where we hear the same phrases with helplessly sinking endings. And perhaps the most remarkable prelude and fugue is the C-sharp minor. It is dedicated to Christ's prayer about the cup in the Garden of Gethsemane. Preparing for the sufferings of the cross, Jesus prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." The prelude is like a mournful aria. And again, if we look at the notation, we will see what looks like the gesture of raising hands in supplication and their powerless lowering. But the main thing is the fugue. The fugue theme consists of only 4 notes. C sharp, D sharp, E, D sharp. Look at how these notes are placed on the staff, and you will see a cross. The theme of the cross, the theme of the C-sharp minor fugue. This theme will go far beyond the Well-Tempered Clavier. Composers of later eras will use it as a symbol of suffering. The theme of the cross in 4 notes. The C-sharp minor fugue is complex. It is written for 5 voices. Not in the sense of singing voices, but for 5 independent melodic lines that overlap and create the polyphonic musical fabric. In a fugue, the theme reappears in each voice, as it should. But then the wonders begin. Suddenly a new theme appears. It is called the theme of the prayer about the cup. It arises in the upper voice. If we look at its shape, we will see that it resembles a circle descending in a spiral. In response to it comes the 3rd theme of the fugue. Thy will be done. With repeated, affirmative notes and a characteristic ending often found in chorales on the words, Thy will be done. The C-sharp minor prelude and fugue, with its cross theme, is a lengthy work. But now for the most amazing thing. Let's look at Bach's name, but write it in Latin letters, Bach. As you know, there is a way of writing notes with Latin letters, and then Bach's name can be played. It turns into a motif of 4 notes. B flat, A, C, B natural. That is, the motif of the cross we just heard in the fugue. Bach, of course, knew how his name sounded and used it as a musical theme. The Well-Tempered Clavier is not program music, unlike Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, which explicitly describes the sounds and scenes in its movement titles. Bach's work is subtler. The genius of the composer is that even if we know nothing about Bach scholars' research or about the Holy Scriptures, when listening to his music, the ideas and meanings of the Bible are conveyed through musical language on another level without using words. But the more we know, the more interesting it is to listen to and understand Bach's music. He's often referred to as the 5th evangelist. Only he speaks to us in the language of music. Riddle number 4. The Well-Tempered Clavier Through the Ages. In his lifetime, no one especially admired Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, not fully realizing the scope of the work. The composer was not at all troubled by this. 20 years after writing the cycle, Bach achieved another feat. In 1744, the second volume of the Well-Tempered Clavier appeared. Bach once again wrote 24 preludes and fugues in all keys. The understanding of the scale of the cycle came only after Bach's death, as often happens with great works. Beethoven studied the cycle from childhood, calling it the musical Bible. Mozart arranged some fugues for string quartet. Schumann told beginner pianists, "The Well-Tempered Clavier must become your daily bread." A wonderful piece of advice from Schumann. The Well-Tempered Clavier is one of those works that is not enough to hear once, and impossible to hear all at once. It must be listened to over a lifetime, and then gradually through the musical lines we begin to discern the lines of a musical gospel. Text by Yulia Kazantseva. If you enjoyed this video essay, support our project via the QR code or the link in the description so we can create new videos. Subscribe to the Academy of the FOMA magazine to better understand the sounds of music.